Hi, I'm Dan Lynch. Join me for FLOSS Weekly, where we're going to talk to John Spriggs, the lead developer of CampFireManager, an open source tool for running bar camps, scheduling your events, and doing much more. That's coming up next on FLOSS Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly 264, recorded Wednesday, September the 11th, 2013. CampFireManager. It's time for another FLOSS Weekly, the show about free Libre open source software. My name is Dan Lynch, and I'm your host for this week. Randall was due to be here, but he's having some technical problems. He's having to get a replacement laptop and some other things. So there isn't even a co-host to introduce. Normally, I would say, and here's my co-host, but unfortunately, you're stuck with just me. And I did consider trying to do two different voices and different hats and things, but it really wasn't going to work. Maybe we can CGI another co-host in. So we're back for another FLOSS Weekly. This is FLOSS Weekly number 264, and the guest this week is actually a project that I know really well, and which is good actually. And we're going to have CampFireManager is our guest project. Now, CampFireManager is a great tool for helping people to organize bar camps. We'll talk a little bit about what bar camps are. I'm imagining we have a very technical audience. A lot of you probably been to bar camps. You probably know what they are. But just in case, I'll explain that a bit later on, exactly what bar camps are. And this software helps you to schedule the talks, and you'll see why that's important as we go along. Lets people vote on talks, does all kinds of things, but I don't want to go on too much about it before we actually get our guest on, which wouldn't be too good. So our guest today is John Spriggs, who is the lead developer of CampFireManager. John, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. And we know each other quite well, so we should probably admit that straight at the start before people think we're, trying to make some kind of false idea that we know more than we do and stuff. We know each other quite well. We've known each other about 5 years, I think. It must be 2008, something like that we met.
Something like that. It's certainly been quite a while. So, it was I think we actually met face-to-face at the first Lug Radio Live. Which,
that's true.
Obviously, was the precursor to the event that kicked all this lot off. So,
yes, yeah. So I'll try not to do too much kind of in jokes and conversation stuff for people who are listening and watching who maybe don't know what the hell we're talking about. Lug Radio Live was a Linux conference in the UK, and it sadly finished in 2009. But we met at 2008 at Lug Radio Live. And following on from Lug Radio Live, we decided that we couldn't let this great community of people, just disappear back into into the ether. We wanted to keep getting people together and carry on from Lug Radio Live with an annual event, which you'll have heard me talk about if you watch this show a lot or you listen to this show a lot. You'll have heard me talk about it. It's an event called OG Camp, which I organise along with a team of other people. I was not trying to say I do it all myself, of course, but we have a great team of people who help us organise. It's my tagline, it's the largest open source conference in the UK. We get about 450 to 500 people coming along to share ideas, to watch talks, give talks, run workshops, do all kinds of cool things. But OG Camp itself is modelled on the bar camp model, which I did say I would kind of very quickly explain. Bar camps are unorganised conferences or unconferences, as you may have heard the term around. And it basically just means that there's no schedule at the start of the event, which sounds like chaos, and sometimes it is kind of like chaos. But there's no schedule at the start of the event. People come along, they pitch talks, they stick them on the board, and the schedule is made up over the weekend or whatever it might be, as people suggest talks and so on. And so I'm conscious that I'm kind of cutting you out now, John, and that's very poor form as the host. So you've been involved in OG Camp since the start, haven't you?
Yeah, so I went to the first one, which was in Wolverhampton, and it was a brilliant venue. Unfortunately, and obviously, Dan's aware of this, so there's one moment I'm talking to the audience. The first venue, the two talks, the two main areas were split across about 3 floors. So to go from where, if you were in a talk on the ground floor and you wanted to go to the talk on the main stage to see what was going, where the main stage was, which was on the top floor, you ended up sort of going up 3 flights of stairs, only to get up there and find out that, you know, the talk that was on the main stage was actually something you weren't that interested in. So on the day, what they did was one of the other organisers basically made a read-only copy of the schedule, which was then moved around the site so that they had a runner basically going up and down every sort of 20 minutes or so just to make sure that the version that was downstairs was the same as the version upstairs. And I thought that was kind of crazy. You know, but you know, it was the first one of these events, and they were just basically doing what they could to keep it running. And you know, in the back of my head, I'm thinking there's something we could be doing better here. But and it didn't really, I couldn't really figure out what it was, and but I didn't really say anything because, you know, it was the first event, and obviously things were going to get better. About 3 weeks later, I went to another bar camp in Manchester, which again was a brilliant venue. Where they had about 8 or 9 rooms, and in each room you had, you know, anywhere from there was a bar area where, you know, it was standing room only, and there was, you know, they were expecting like 5 or 6 people around there. Or the main stage had about 300 seats, and I'd given a talk which I thought was all right at the first Odd Camp, which was in a room that seated maybe sort of 30 odd people and was packed right out the door and around the corridor, and it was just, for me, it was phenomenal. And I thought, oh wow, that's a brilliant talk. I'm going to give it again at Barcamp Manchester. So I booked the main stage, seats 300 people, and there were 6 people in the audience, of which I seem to recall, Dan, you were one of them.
I was. I was.
Yeah, and so I thought, you know, this is crazy. There shouldn't. People should have kind of an awareness of how many people are going to come to their talks, so they can pick the right size room. And then I thought, well, why should you have to pick the right size room when if there's a system that's already involved in this conversation, then they know, you know, this room's going to have, you know, anywhere from 50 to 100 people in. So why not put the talk that's going to have more than 50 people in that room there, and that sort of thing. So I kind of started to sketch out some ideas, and approached the Odd Camp organising team. And that's where CampFireManager came from. We wrote a kind of like a working draft for Odd Camp 2010, and that was used, but it wasn't brilliant. The schedule, they were basically just using the grid part of the scheduling rather than kind of having that was kind of the key thing for me, where I thought it was important for it to be used. So I kind of I brought up to the organising crew that it would be great if we could use with the full scheduling and everything else, and that was used at Odd Camp 2011 in Farnham, which unfortunately I wasn't at. Because my son had just been born, and you know, I think my wife would have been a bit grumpy if I'd have turned around and said, actually not going to be at home this weekend because I'm going to a Linux conference. So I delegated the organising of sort of management of CampFireManager to another one of the organisers, a guy called Mark, who did a brilliant job. He kept it running. I got some feedback, but basically the key part for me was between when I'd first written it and when I was talking Mark through how it fit together, he was asking me questions about why does this do this, or why does it work in that way. And basically I realized that, you know, in the 2 years since I'd written it, I'd completely forgotten how huge swathes of it fit together. So another project that I'm involved in, I decided to do a rewrite of the software then, and I basically used the two code bases. I brought them both up at the same time to use the same sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't use any existing PHP framework when I wrote it. So as per usual for an open source project, rather than using what was already there, I decided to write my own. It's particularly prevalent in the PHP world, I've been told, but I'm sure it exists elsewhere as well. So I wrote a framework that deals with the rendering of a timetable, users, and a key concept to this, which is voting. So essentially, when you're looking at the grid, you've got your time slots, slot 1, talk 1, in room 1. I want to go to that talk. So you go to a web page on your smartphone, or you can send a text message to a number using a backend called Gamu. And what that does is that sort of chain shows that you're attending a talk. Now, in previous versions, the text messaging would also let you do all sorts of things like proposing talks and proposing talks, amending talks, and deleting them. But that all got very complicated, and it's really hard to fit the amount of content that you need into 160 characters. So it meant that if you were sending a text message, it would get too big. Anyway, so I wrote CampFireManager 2 between OggCamp 11 and 12. And last year, we used CampFireManager version 2 at OggCamp 2012, and it was pretty successful. And it made. So again, OggCamp 2012 was in Liverpool John Moores University, same place it is this year, and it was spread across 2 days, and there were rooms. Again, spread across 3 floors, 4 floors, something like that. There were quite a few rooms, and again, quite a few talks going on. And people were using their smartphones, people were using their laptops, which obviously OggCamp being a very Linux and open source event. I'm not saying that's all there is to it, but because it covers Creative Commons and free culture, but a lot of people there have got smartphones, have got laptops, did have the Nexus 7s had just come out, I think, so people just starting to use tablets, and people had iPads and iPhones, and they were using these smart devices to interact with CampFireManager. At the same time, on the main stage, every now and then they'd bring up the main grid, and we didn't use a couple of the other tools which we had, which was there's a sort of direction screen. So when you go to a room, sometimes you'll find like on now, up next, particularly at hotels and places like that. So CampFireManager has got a screen that if you've got like a laptop or something, you could set that up outside the room. So you had in here talk A and talk B. So that's kind of CampFireManager in a very quick and loose nutshell.
Okay, well that's a really great explanation, a kind of overview explanation. We'll probably go back over some of it and break some of it down as well. So, I mean, you mentioned that. So it's a web app. It's written in PHP, and you mentioned that you didn't use any existing frameworks or anything like that. Did you look for other frameworks? Did you think, I wonder if there's something that already does this, or did you do the classic thing of going, well, even if there is, I could do it better, so I'm going to do my own? Did you look around for other things?
I did a little bit. The problem that I've got is that I struggle quite a bit with kind of getting my head around complex concepts. So it took me ages to get used to using Git, for example, and like Code Igniter and things like that, to look at whether I could use those. But all I kept seeing was like a mass of hundreds and hundreds of folders and loads of kind of files inside there. And now I'm basically, my tagline has always been that I write really bad PHP. And that's predominantly because I although I do use PHP quite a bit as part for writing Campfire Manager and writing CC Hits, this other project I was talking about. It's a hobby. It's not a full-time gig for me. My day job is I work in IT security, so I know enough to render stuff on the page, and basically Campfire Manager and CC Hits has all been kind of it's not an experiment, but it's kind of how I've been learning how PHP works. And each kind of iteration of these bits of software, my knowledge of the language has got better. About 6 months ago, I started looking at maybe moving to using Zend framework for Camp 13, but I didn't have enough time really. As I said, I've got quite a young child, and I didn't really have the time to kind of make the educational leap to get from my own homegrown framework, which I understand and I kind of know how it all works, even though it's not particularly the best written code ever, and I realize that it's not. It's clear enough kind of how things work, and it's very, very easy to spin up a Campfire Manager instance for a weekend event, for example, like OggCamp. We have used one other event called UCubed, which I used to be involved in running, and we used that to schedule the talks in the sort of the two rooms that we had. But again, it's based on the barcamp model. So the intention is if you've gone in with the plan of using Campfire Manager, and on the day you've got no Wi-Fi, whilst you can still use SMS to get you talk attendance and stuff like that, ultimately you can fall back relatively quickly to the standard barcamp model. I have plans to bring back into the Campfire Manager framework being able to propose talks and edit talks using maybe not text message, but maybe using email or Twitter. Those sorts of things that, again, you've got an interaction. And maybe Twitter is not even a good, but yeah. So we've got plans to kind of progress, kind of how things are going, and to kind of help with that kind of in case of loss of Wi-Fi. How do we progress environment?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the big things that about barcamp events, you kind of mentioned this. You've kind of gone through this a bit already, but just to clarify for people, because anybody can take their Post-it note, stick it on a schedule. And that's it. That's kind of traditionally how barcamps work. You write your name of your talk on a Post-it note, you run towards the board, you stick it on this big, this big drawn out schedule, and it's kind of like a race of who can get there first and who can trip each other up and all this kind of stuff.
Voting with elbows is the way I describe it as.
Yeah, voting with elbows. That's a great way of describing it, actually. So what tends to happen, I mean, that's great, and I can see why people like that. But the problem is, as you kind of mentioned earlier, you'll end up with, and you see this at a lot of bar camps, you end up with a really, really popular talk in a tiny room and say 50 people trying to cram into a room that's really only big enough for 20. And then you got all the health and safety implications that come along with that, not to mention fire regs and other things. And then at the other end, you can get the opposite, and get someone in a massive 300-seater auditorium with 4 people watching their talk. And to me, that I think to anybody who's a hacker who's listening, that's suboptimal, let's say. And as you said, there had to be some way of fixing it. So that's the idea that Campfire Manager is trying to fix, in allowing people to vote for the talks that they want to see and scheduling them in appropriately resourced rooms. But I know there's been a bit of I wouldn't say a backlash, but there's been resistance to this in some areas. I wondered if you wanted to address that in any way, because some people are very attached to that idea of, I have a Post-it note, I write on it, I push everyone out the way, I charge to the front. That's how it is, and that's how it always shall be. And some people don't like the idea of a thing that will move the schedule around for you. So how do you answer those kind of critics?
Sure. So you're right. Campfire Manager doesn't handle those very well. essentially, the way the CampFireManager fits together is that there's a background process that spins every minute, I think it is, to see whether or not the talks are due to be scheduled imminently into a slot, and if so, it then sets those windows. But obviously, that doesn't solve the voting with elbows scenario, and I use that. I mean I've been to quite a few bar camps, and it's not bar camps work because, frankly, it's part of what makes a bar camp, and there is absolutely I've got no problem with that. CampFireManager can be configured to have no scheduling engine running. I don't think that's the best way of doing things, because if you're using that like that, then there are better tools for the job. There's a group of guys called the Geeks of London who have I think it's called Grid for Rails, which much closely simulates a barcamp board in a digital environment. It was used to very good effect, I believe, for the second day of Barcamp Media City in Salford in the UK, which was about 2 or 3 years ago now. Apparently, it worked really well. I have seen it. I've just not seen it running at an event. I didn't make it to the second day of my Barcamp Media City, but I know that they were getting it working on day one. So I know that exists, and I know that that's a very good tool that is much closer to the traditional barcamp method. And frankly, if your event is 3 rooms on the same floor with a single interconnecting hall, which I've been to bar camps like that as well, then there is absolutely no reason not to have a sheet of paper, post-it notes. It works. There's no point in trying to fix that. It's when you get to a larger event with more people across multiple floors, which is where the digital grids come. I have seen some people suggesting that the best way of doing a digital grid for an event like that is to have the post-it notes scanned in order on the grid, so that when you move a talk, you've got like a QR code, and you just basically need to scan the 2 QR codes so it shows where the 2 talks have moved to and from. Again, I mean, it's a novel solution to it. It's not something I would choose to do, but ultimately, I'm not running your bar camp. It's not down to me. And I think it would be really good for people to look at the size of the event that they're hoping to run. Look at the number of people they're planning on having coming. Look at the type of venue you've got, and look at what the tools are. So if you are definite that what you really want is a paper grid, then go for a paper grid. If you think that you might like to have a paper grid with a digital front end to it, then have a look at Grid, the Geeks for London tool. But if you're looking for something that can schedule your talks for you, that can apply a bit more intelligence to a conference, then I think BarCampManager is the best thing for that. BarCampManager? CampFireManager even, sorry. One of the things that CampFireManager does that I've not seen any other scheduling tool do is to automatically update tools like Joined In, which is, if people are aware of Lanyard, it's a little bit like Lanyard, but for starters, it's open source, which is great for anyone that's in the open source community, by somebody who I know very well, a brilliant person called Lorna Jane. And she's the lead developer for the project. She comes to OggCamp, so we've collaborated quite closely on kind of making quite good connection between the 2 pieces of software. So yeah, when your talk is fixed in CampFireManager, which typically happens about 15 minutes before the talk's due to start, so that people kind of know which room they go into and kind of who else is going to be there, who's going to be presenting, and that sort of thing. Then at the same time as it fixes the talk, it updates Joined In, so you can then go to Joined In, you can rate your talk, you can give feedback for the person that's talking to read it after the event. You know, those sorts of things. It just kind of adds a little bit of a little bit more feedback for both the attendees, the presenters, and the organisers. So the organisers know, actually, you know what, this person was a really good speaker. Because OggCamp's a little bit different to normal barcamps in that OggCamp has a fixed track, so that you always know at least one set of talks that are going on. And then so it gives people who organise events a great way of feeding back. Actually, you know what, this person was a brilliant talker. I'd really like them to talk as a keynoter, or I'd really like them to come and have a slot here. So CampFireManager can handle a single fixed track, still with the voting, because then again, you know, your presenter understands how many people they're going to have in the audience theoretically. You've got your if you've got too many talks for a single slot, the talks are put into what I refer to as limbo. So basically, it hasn't met the criteria for being in a talk in a room, and that is it's got more people than the talk above it, or in some cases it's only got a certain number. So one thing that was requested for OggCamp last year was to have a minimum threshold of 3 people, so that a room is only used if it's got at least 3 people going to it. Which I think is actually quite a sensible idea, because it gives you a chance to see, well, actually, you know what, they might be really good as corridor conversations, but it's not enough to use a room up with. As to whether or not we're going to use that again this year, I don't know. I've not had a proper chat about that with the rest of the organising crew for this year. Sorry.
Yeah. That's okay. Well, that's something we should probably do offline, off this show. So I'm sure people would start falling asleep if we did that. And I was just going to mention, actually, there seems to be some network gremlins on your end now and again. So occasionally we're losing the odd little bit here. It's not a major problem. Just in case anyone's listening and they're thinking, what's going on with the audio there, or what's happening? Occasionally there's little breakups, but thankfully we can understand kind of 99% of what you're saying. So I mean, it's a quite a big tool by now, and you've got all kinds of different stuff going on. I was interested you talked about Joined In and other things that you can connect to. I was just wondering, is there any kind of plugin structure or API or something? So say I think to myself, I want to use CampFireManager, but I'd like to add something that will, I don't know, tweet from a certain account or link to some other kind of web service in some way, maybe, I don't know, even like a Jabber chat bot or something. Is there any way I could do that easily? Is it did you think about designing it for other people to add things?
Yeah, absolutely. So CampFireManager does already have a Twitter plugin, so it will tweet. Effectively, there is a plugin architecture that has got hooks at various points in the code. So the hooks are things like when an object is added to a database, when an object is edited or deleted, when a talk is fixed. There's a cron job, so you can have it poll something every time the cron daemon ticks over. So that's all in there. It is on my roadmap to include XMPP and IRC and also SMTP engines into it as well. They're not in there right now. Predominantly, the thing that stopped me from advancing the XMPP stuff was actually Google dropping it in favor of Hangouts. Because up till that point, anyone that had a Google account, which was most people that I was aware of going to these events, had a Google account. Whether they used it or not, it didn't really matter. But to have that interaction of the talk you were interested in attending is about to start. Tick. Here's a list of talks. That would have been really useful in Google Talk. That isn't available to us at the moment. As I said, IRC is on the roadmap. XMPP is probably going to be on the roadmap pretty soon. SMS is there. SMTP is not currently on the roadmap just because I just need to work out exactly how that's going to fit together. But yes, there is an architecture in there for plugins, and it seems to be quite straightforward. Again, I've only got a couple of people that also contribute to the code. So at the moment, I'm not 100% certain whether anyone else that's looking at it would find it simple to understand. So if you are interested in looking at a scheduling tool from the perspective of being able to write a plugin for something like this, then it's on GitHub. You can find it github.com/CampFireManager. If you want to find out more about the project itself, CampFireManager.info will take you to a one-pager that links you off to, again, the GitHub page. We've got mailing lists for users and developers, and there's also a demo instance that is running at the moment. The cron jobs aren't running on it, so talks aren't being fixed. But yes, you can have a look at it and kind of have a click around at the user interface and see kind of how that works.
And yeah, that sounds really cool. And talking a bit more about the technical side of things, because you've kind of led us that way, which is good. If I was wanting to get Campfire Manager and run it myself, what would I need to do? Obviously, PHP is involved. I'm going to need Apache and other things. What's the best way for me to grab it and use it?
Sure. So we have a Vagrant config file. That's not really developed for running live, because during the setup process it loads a load of demo data into it. But if you want to set a running instance up on your own box, then you can just drop. If you've got Vagrant installed, it will bring up an Ubuntu box running PHP and MySQL and Apache. It'll load the tables into it. It'll set up the SMS engine I was talking about. So it will use, you can use Gamu out of the box from it. There are a few libraries that you are dependent on. And again, reading the Vagrant, it uses Vagrant and Puppet. So if you read the Puppet manifest file, that'll list all the PHP add-ons that you need to install. You don't need to install Gamu. Gamu, I find, is a really straightforward way of connecting an SMS. An SMS engine. So it's got basic input and output into a 3G USB stick or mobile phone. Like an old Nokia phone or something like that. That will talk of Bluetooth or serial. Gamu just works with those quite well. At its heart, it is a PHP MySQL application. It uses OpenID for authentication, so there are some PHP libraries that you require from that. Again, they're not mandatory, but if you haven't got them, you can't do OpenID authentication, and the service can't tell that you've not got the OpenID libraries there. So we would need to go through. If you were planning on deploying it but didn't want to use OpenID, you'd need to have a look through the code and perhaps a chat with me about stripping out that authentication mechanism.
Because presumably it would break it every time it looks for that. It's going to fall down.
There's only a few places that the OpenID stuff is called from. Once you've authenticated, that's it. You're authenticated for the duration of your PHP session. So that's not too much of a problem. It's when you click on the login button, you get like 3 or 4 OpenID providers. So it's Google and I think GitHub now do OpenID. But there's it's Stack Overflow. So there's a Stack Exchange one, and I think the other one that was there was Yahoo. But again, I haven't got it on screen, and I don't want to distract myself too much by trying to pull it up and make it work. But yes, so there's a few OpenID providers there that we'd need to strip out of the UI that we don't currently.
Excellent. And we talked a little bit before about the fact that it's PHP and so on. And I noticed there you said at heart it's a PHP MySQL application. Did you pick those technologies because they're so prevalent, because they're easy to host? Lots of hosts will have them, or was there some particular other reason that you wanted to use them?
No, it's just that I'm most comfortable writing PHP. The only other language that I've ever had any particular strength in was BBC Basic, which for people outside the UK, they will not know. Yeah, and even that was some 10, 15 years ago now that I had any sort of strength in that language. PHP is my go-to language, so if it's what I will tend to use as opposed to looking at Python or Perl or Visual Basic or any of that. Like the language that I usually end up cobbling stuff together in is PHP, and it basically it's just because it's such a well documented language. Yes, there are some niggles around how the language is structured, but generally, it's a very straightforward programming language to use. And with the object orientated stuff that's come in the last 4 or 5 years, with PHP 5, with PDO, which is the PHP database objects, that's made programming any sort of database driven application really easy. And we use the fact that retrieving a row from the database as a database object means that you can then perform actions based on that really easily. So every talk has a series of presenter objects. It has a series of attendee objects. It has a room object that it attaches to. It has a slot object it attaches to. So you can just you can really easily just pull the whole data structure apart and retrieve all those individual pieces just by 2 or 3 PHP calls. It's really, really easy for me to get my head around. Whether or not somebody else looking at it would find it as straightforward or not, I don't know. But yeah, that's why I use PHP.
Yeah, that's very cool. And you mentioned before that there's like 2 or 3 of you working on it. So we should probably mention the other guys who are working on it as well. So who else is kind of contributing to this?
So the core guy that I work with is a guy called Jack Weird, and he's been really good. So when my go-to language is PHP, he's my go-to guy for JavaScript. So he's done all of the JavaScript and the jQuery and the jQuery mobile front end. So basically all of the rendering kind of once you leave my back end part and arrive at his very nice front end part, that's all him. Some sort of minor adjustments, but frankly, that's all down to him. He's been phenomenal with that, and that's been really good. I've been working with Les Pounder, who's been project managing it for me. Les is the guy who we refer to in the OggCamp circles as the chief. He's the guy that runs the crew for the weekend. So he outside of the actual OggCamp event, he does a lot of the project managing of the imbeciles like me who kind of don't know which way we're going with things. He kind of chivers us along, and he's the guy that's written all our test plans and things like that. So that's been really useful. I've had a few bits and pieces, more so last year than this year, from another guy from the community, a guy called Heed, or Michael. He's been really useful. He made a lot of suggestions when we were first getting started about kind of how to get the the talk slots and those sorts of things put in. Mark Johnson, who I mentioned before, is one of the co-organisers of OggCamp. A lot of the changes that were made between CampFireManager 1 and CampFireManager 2 were entirely down to conversations with him. Laura Cohen from the Ubuntu UK podcast, another organizer. She helped out a lot with kind of the user experience stuff in the first year, and a lot of that has fed through to current years, although it's not directly influenced by her anymore. We've had some great helpers kind of getting involved in tests. People like Jonathan Archer. I'm trying to remember some of the other names that were involved, but basically because CampFireManager is actually quite a niche product at its heart, it's quite difficult to kind of say, here's my huge list of people that get involved. Lorna Jane Mitchell has been an absolute godsend whenever I get stuck, even if it's not necessarily from a code perspective, but from a conceptual perspective. If I ever have a problem, I go to her and she kind of walks me through it and just kind of asks me quite logical and sensible questions. So on the first day of OggCamp last year, I don't know how I did it, but I broke the scheduling engine, and she and I sat together for. Oh, I've just lost the lights again. She and I sat together. I'm just going to wiggle my arm.
You've just gone into for the benefit of those listening to the audio. John's lights went off there. He looked like he's in witness protection. Sorry, carry on.
She and I sat together for about an hour and a half. The last OggCamp, trying to figure out how I'd broken the scheduling engine and how I could bring it back together again. Again, it wasn't necessarily from a coding perspective, but just from a kind of, have you tried this? Have you looked at that? If we step through this, where do we get to? That sort of perspective. That's been phenomenal for me, and I'm really grateful to her for all her help on that. We've got Catherine Reeve, Binary Kitten. She is the person that I'm talking to at the moment about going to Zend. And I'm also having a chat with a couple of other people about, maybe Zend is not the right way to go. Maybe Node.js is what the next step to take.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be quite a change. Yeah, the Node.
Well, it would be, and it's not something that I'm looking at CampFireManager as being kind of like a hobby project for me. It's something that gets me interested in programming and gets me interested in learning new things. If we were to move to Node, which is not for definite, it's something we want to look at. If we were to move to Zend, both of these things teach me huge amounts about the languages, because Zend is a completely different beast from working with just pure raw PHP. Likewise, Node is a big step outside my comfort zone at the moment, and it is something that I'd like to try. So, it's two rival factions sort of vying for the attention of the CampFireManager project at the moment.
I was thinking of Two Tribes Go to War by Frankie Goes to Hollywood for some reason.
Going through my head at the same time. Oh, sorry about that.
That would be an appropriate soundtrack, possibly. Okay, so there's quite a few people involved already, but obviously, open source projects always need contributions. We need help from other people. So what kind of help do you need from people who might want to get involved, and how can they get involved?
So at the moment, there is absolutely no translations outside British English. So something along those lines would be really good. Just to be honest, just getting people aware of the project and considering using it at their events would be phenomenal. I'd love. I don't know whether it was this show or another show, but I heard of someone say that an open source project, whilst the code is open, is not useful to other people until at least three other. So I know that I've used it for OggCamp. I have used it at UCubed, but that was at least one version back now, and I'd love to get people to try it with the current code base. So I think what I'd like to see is I'd like to see 2 other events picking it up and running with it, just to kind of see where they've found issues with it. Because ultimately, the more people that are aware of CampFireManager, the more likely we are to have other people using it. The more likely we are to have other people using it, the more the rough edges can get knocked off it, and we can get to hopefully what is a fantastic end-to-end experience. The last thing that I'd like to have with CampFireManager that isn't there at the moment is actually selling tickets through it as well. And that's a big piece of work. So at the moment, OggCamp uses, I think, Eventbrite. I might be wrong.
It's Eventbrite, yeah.
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 We don't have any way of kind of tying the getting a ticket group of people to the I've turned up group of people. So currently, if you've got somebody that's already said they're coming and they've got something that says they've turned up on site and they've got all of that piece, they shouldn't need to authenticate again to get onto the talk scheduling software. And I'd like to kind of join that gap together. It's not on the roadmap for me for the moment because it's it's selling stuff, and again, it's a hobby project. It's not something that I particularly am able to sort of organise, going and talking to PayPal or Eventbrite or someone like that. But in the longer term, that would be really good to have some way of tying that together.
Yeah, that would be really, really useful. I think obviously there are the problems of processing payments and the legal side of it that comes into it and so on. But I think it's definitely a good goal. Okay, then. So is there anything else you want to tell us about CampFireManager before we kind of, because I know there's some other things, some other projects you're involved with that I'd like to quickly kind of talk about as well. So is there anything else you want to tell us about CampFireManager? If people want to get involved, they need to go to campfiremanager.info to find all the information there. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. There is a mailing list.
Okay.
So if you want to ask questions about how is this supposed to work, or why does this do it in this way, or those sorts of things, join the mailing list and ask those questions. Or if you want to submit tickets and say this isn't working the way I was expecting it to, then great, that's fantastic as well. Or alternatively, I'm on Twitter as John the Nice Guy. That's JONTHENICEGUY. Or my email address I think is on that campfiremanager.info, but if not, send a mail to the mailing list and say you want to have a chat with me about it.
Excellent. Now, something that's close to our hearts, both of our hearts, I know, is Creative Commons. And I'm sure everyone listening to this knows what Creative Commons is. But Creative Commons music specifically, I do a show, a music podcast, and one of the places that I seem to spend every show just going, I got this song from cchits.net, which is a project that John does. So can you tell us a little bit about cchits.net, what it is and where it came from?
Yeah, absolutely. So cchits.net is a podcast. Well, it's a few things. Essentially, it's a promotional tool for Creative Commons music. And it was about 2.5 years ago, something like that, maybe 2 years ago. No, about 2.5 years ago. And essentially, various podcasters submit tracks into cchits.net. And their submission just says, I played this track on such and such a show. And having had that submission, it then gives me effectively a curated list of tracks that people think are really good. I then use that list of tracks to generate a show every single day, which I think in the sort of 2.5, coming up for 3 years, I think I've only missed 5 days worth of shows, something like that, purely because tracks were submitted under the belief that they were Creative Commons tracks, and after reviewing them, after I've heard them being played, I've realised that actually they weren't Creative Commons, so I've pulled them from the site and taken them out. It's a very easy mistake. It can be a very easy mistake to make, especially if you've been talking with an artist, and everyone thinks that the track that's being played is Creative Commons and isn't. I think I might have actually made all 5 of those mistakes myself. In all honesty, I don't think it's anyone else that submitted them. So we've got these. We've had a track every day for 2.5 years. At the end of each week, a show is produced that takes the last 7 days worth of tracks, plus the 3 top-rated tracks from the week before. So it's only from the tracks that were played in the week before, and it adds those to the end of those 7 tracks. So you end up with once a week you get 10 tracks. Tracks. You vote for the tracks you like. Again, me and my voting. You can't beat a bit of voting. Democracy for the win. So the results of those votes are used to create a monthly chart. Now, we've had a bit of a problem with the monthly chart for a few months now, in that the uploads. I host with quite a large US cheap hosting provider who have a maximum file transfer size, and I keep hitting it with the monthly shows. So every now and then I'll get a monthly show up on the site, but generally it's only one format out of. So I release in OGG Vorbis, MP3, and MP4 audio. So those 3 files are put up for the daily, the weekly, and the monthly shows. Like I said, I tends to be, if I get any of them through on the monthly show, it's the OGG format, because I've been quite focused on getting CampFireManager to a position that's ready for OGG Camp, which will be in next month, the 3rd weekend, which is the 19th and 20th of October. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't lose focus on CampFireManager. So I kind of decided not to try and fix the issues with the monthly show. And then what I'll do is probably around November, December time, I will go back and I will generate the monthly shows since it stopped working, and upload them and make sure that they're working.
And you have the awesome, I've forgotten the name, that's really bad, of our robotic presenter lady.
Doris.
Doris, there you go, which uses Festival, I believe, to generate computer voice. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, carry on.
So CampFireManager, CC Hits, I actually have no normal input into the show aside from submitting tracks like any other podcaster. And essentially I write the code to make sure it keeps churning. But aside from that, all that I basically do, I have an EC2 instance that spins up every morning, asks cchits.net for today's track, which, if it isn't already set, it defines and sends to me. And then it uses a combination of Bash, PHP, SOX, which is the sound exchange toolkit, Festival, I think, and this track, to generate effectively a raw WAV file. And then I use lame OGG and I can't remember what the MP4 encoder is that I'm using. My intention is also to encode for Opus in the new year as well, but that's a way off yet. So.
Yeah, it's very cool. And if I encourage you to have a listen to the show, as I mentioned, I use. It sounds very nasty, doesn't it? I use the show, but you know what I mean. I listen to the show quite a lot. I tend to listen to the weekly shows rather than the daily ones. And that kind of robotic voice is very interesting. At first it's a bit strange, but then you get used to it, and it's quite cool. So if people want to find out more, cchits.net is the place to go. You can go there. You can vote for your favorite Creative Commons tracks that are on the site. And it's really helpful because, I mean, as a kind of Creative Commons musician myself of okay, I might not be Jonathan Colton, but I do make music and put it out under Creative Commons. It's kind of hard to find exposure and for the listener as well. It's hard to kind of get an idea of what's going to be good and some kind of idea of what's popular and what's not and so on. You can look at the amount of plays someone's got on Jamendo, for example, but doesn't always tell you. So it's a very, very cool project, and I'm really glad that you're doing it. And I need to contribute more from the kind of other. I seem to be downstream of CC Hits. I've said this before. I seem to be kind of downstream of CC Hits. So I get all the songs I like out of it, but I don't put many into it. So that's the way it works. So if there's anyone listening who is into Creative Commons music, maybe you do a podcast or maybe you don't, you could you could find out you could speak to John, find out how to submit tracks. And get involved in that as well. So anything else quickly that you want to say about CC Hits? Because I'm conscious that we're slightly running out of time now.
Okay, well, CC Hits, if you want to get in touch with me about that, email show, SHOW, @cchits.net. That's the best place to kind of get all the information. There is about links on there and, links to... I use Gitorious rather than GitHub for that one. But yeah, get in touch with me and I'll be more than happy to kind of point you in the right direction for anything else you want to know with that.
Cool. And you mentioned, just very quickly, Gitorious rather than GitHub. A lot of people won't know the kind of political reasons behind that. It's all to do with software licensing and so on. But am I right in thinking you like the AGPL for your web projects? Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key things about both CC Hits and should be about CampFireManager, but I don't think we've managed it for this iteration, is that all of the data from CC is on download. The only thing that's obfuscated is credentials, basically. We never store IP addresses. We never store browser agents or anything like that. There's no tracking on the site. But the database as a lump is available to anyone. And that pretty much came from a conversation I had with Evan Prodromo from the Identity Project. Yeah, he ran the URL shortener, ur1.ca for a while, and I don't know whether it's still. I think it's still running, and he makes a point on that of having the full database as a download for that, and I thought that was really powerful. I had a bit of a chat with him about it, and he inspired me to make my project AGPL licensed because his project was AGPL licensed. And also to make the database freely available. So yes, AGPL is something I'm very passionate about. It's definitely a move that web projects should be taking. I understand some people have concerns about the bleed through of sort of license conditions, but from a free software perspective, AGPL is the GPL for the web, and if projects aren't using AGPL, then effectively what they're doing is releasing the equivalent of BSD license stuff. Now, again, that's not a problem, but effectively the software can be locked up. And that's a shame. It shouldn't occur like that. Not in a free software project. So.
Excellent. Well, obviously, I agree with those sentiments. Not that I seem to say that on a weekly basis on this show, so I'll spare the listeners the lecture on that one. Okay, so a couple of quick questions to finish off then. Randall's favorite questions. I think I can guess the answers to the first one based on what you've already told us. But your favorite scripting language?
Is PHP. Yeah, absolutely PHP. Maybe the next time, next OggCamp, I will reply saying Node.js, and JavaScript. But right now, it's PHP.
Okay, and Randall's other favorite question: favorite text editor.
Now, I'm in a bit of a quandary on this one. If I'm in a shell, it's actually Nano. Yeah, I don't use any IDE sort of functionality when I'm in a shell. Unfortunately, as I said, I work in network security, and you can't always find Nano, so I end up having to resort to using VIA, which tends to be on most of the firewall products I use. In a GUI. If I'm forced to use Windows, which I do on a regular basis at work, I use Notepad++. And in Linux, I will tend to use at the moment NetBeans.
Oh, right. That's an interesting choice.
So I'm all over the place.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. I thought you might have said Genie, because I'm a big fan of Genie and on a Linux desktop. But anyway, we're not here to talk about what I like. Right. So unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time, John. We're almost at the end of the show. So thank you very much for coming on, and it's been really good to talk to you. And finally, we should probably just quickly reiterate, if people want to, you want to try Campfire Manager, you want to get involved or whatever, go to campfiremanager.info. That's the website. And also CC Hits. If you're into your Creative Commons music, you need to check that out. It's at cchits.net. Is there anything else I need to mention?
No, that's it. I'm at John the Nice Guy if you want to follow me on Twitter. Although I'm not that active on the in code. So yes.
You broke up a little bit there. Sorry, what did you say? Just when you went, I'm blah, 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 on something else.
I'm elbow deep in code at the moment.
Okay,
so I'm not really that active on there. So.
Okay, no, that's cool. All right, and thanks very much for joining us, John. It's always a pleasure.
No worries at all, and I look forward to seeing you at OggCamp.
Yes, you certainly will. All right, and so that was John Spriggs, who is the lead developer of Campfire Manager, and as we mentioned, some other things, cchits.net, and he talked a lot about OggCamp. OggCamp is an event that I'm involved with, so I'm completely biased on this. But if you do want to come along to OggCamp, you're in the UK, or you can make it to the UK. It's on the 19th and 20th of October this year, obviously. So it's coming up. It's just under 6 weeks away, which is scary because there's so much left to organise. But yeah, it's just under 6 weeks away. There's a video on the OggCamp website. If you don't understand what the hell it's about, it's a strange name. It's a strange, event in some ways, but it's lovely and friendly and everyone's great. So if you want to find out what the hell it is and what it's about, you can go to oggcamp.org, which is oggcamp.org, and there's a video on the front page there, which features me in my funky red hat and some other things, and other people involved as well. It's a nice little 7-minute documentary about the thing, so it's not going to take you all day to watch it. And you can get an idea, and you can get tickets on there as well, so head to oggcamp.org. And yeah, and with the lack of a co-host, I'm struggling for people to talk to, so I'm going to quickly take you through what's coming up on the show. I'm not going to bore you by talking to myself for too long. All right, and so we've got... what else have we got? We have got coming up for the rest of September, we've got quite a few things. Next week, we've got OpenWRT, which I don't know if I'm going to be on for that because I suspect somebody else. I think Aaron's already in the seat for that one. But it's a fantastic project. It is a open source firmware for your router, for your internet router at home. It's called OpenWRT because it came out of it was originally made for the WRT routers, the Linksys WRT54G and GL and GS and other ones in that range, and they were made with a Linux kernel and other things. So the thing got open sourced. It's really useful. I use it all the time, and you're going to find out much more about that next week with Randall and Aaron. And then the week after, we have got you have to excuse me looking at my notes here. We've got ZoneMinder, which I'll confess I don't know a massive amount about, but just looking up some of the notes on it, it's a Linux webcam, Linux security kind of CCTV camera management tool, which is quite interesting. I don't have I live in a tiny flat, not much point in CCTV. I can pretty much see everything that I need to see, but I know lots of people are into their home automation, home security stuff right now. So ZoneMinder could help you with that, help you, monitor your cameras and stuff when you're away from home. So you find out more about that on the following week. That is the week of, let me just have a look. That is the week of, blah, 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 I can't find it. The week of the 25th, September the 25th. And then OpenWRT coming up on the 18th next week. And lots more stuff coming up on the show as we go along. If you have a favorite project that you think we need to get on the show, we need to talk to, that's great. We're always keen to find out more about that. The best way to do it is to email Randall. His address is Merlin, that's Merlin with a Y, at stonehenge.com. That's his email address. If you can have the project leader or someone involved in the project, contact them, have them email Randall. That gets them straight to the top of the list. And they can be scheduled in and come on the show, and that's fantastic. And we rely on your feedback and stuff as well, so please do let us know what you think. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can find us on Twitter. We've got a Twitter account. I think it's at Floss Weekly. We're on Google+. There's a Floss Weekly page if you search for Floss Weekly. There's also a live chat which goes along as we're doing the show, and you can get involved in there. It's on IRC. So you can find information about that at twit.tv. You can find information on there about how to get involved in the chat and so on, and come and chat to us as well. And with that, if you want to find anything about anything that I'm doing, you can head to danlynch.org. You can find me on Twitter at MethodDan is my name on Twitter. And you can find all the information on danlynch.org. I won't bore you with more of that. Come to OggCamp, make sure you do, 19th and 20th of October. And Randall, hopefully, touch wood, crossed fingers and all of that, will be back next week with a shiny new computer, and he'll be here to tell you about OpenWRT. All right, that's it for FLOSS Weekly this time. So until then, until next time, take care and stay free and stay open source. Thank you very much.